As de-risking intensifies, China's economy is in trouble.
地缘政治冲突确实加速了产业链的一个重构。
Is one country's losses another's gain?
We have doubled the growth in revenue.
Mexico's new wave of growth comes out of tensions between the U.S. and China.
Great power competition is back in the Americas. Our hemisphere has been invaded by China, and they are now the #1 trading partner in the region. #1 trading partner in the region.
Can China go back to business as usual?
中国愿意同美国做伙伴、做朋友。
I think that President Xi and China's leaders would like to believe that a better environment will compel companies to continue to invest in expanding their footprint in China. The reality, though, I think is much more complicated.
Is this the beginning of the end for Made in China?
There should be no one cheerleading for China to crash, because that will be terrible for the global economy.
Shein. It's the world's largest fashion retailer, with a valuation larger than Zara and H&M combined. With its meteoric rise comes intense scrutiny. In July 2023, 6 American fashion influencers went on a sponsored trip to Shein's factories in China. Their reviews of Shein were glowing.
I think I went in there not expecting the best conditions for the workers, but I was pleasantly surprised how clean it was.
A backlash ensued. All 6 influencers came under fire for praising Shein, which has been accused of using forced labor in Xinjiang and engaging in environmentally damaging practices. Shein joins other China-founded companies like TikTok, Temu, and Huawei in being subject to a special investigation by the U.S. Congress with a focus on data security. Shein also followed the footsteps of TikTok and moved its global headquarters to Singapore.
Chinese government has no right to have the data taken from a Chinese company operating overseas. If they want to take that, they have to consult the host country first before they can do anything.
Many people in Congress, as far as they're concerned, anything China means the Chinese Communist Party and therefore must be evil. So my suspicion is simply being just registered in Singapore is not going to make an awful lot of difference.
In China, national security is also of great concern. In March 2023, employees of Mintz Group, an American due diligence firm, were arrested and investigated. A month later, Chinese authorities launched an investigation into Bain over similar transgressions. The following month, it was multinational research firm Capvision who came under probe. Then in September, Nomura Holdings. In October, it was Foxconn. All these cases unfolded as China expanded its counter-espionage law in July. Under the revised law, the unauthorized obtaining of documents, data, materials, and items related to national security and interests can constitute a spying offense.
What actually is a regulation or a document that might be considered a state secret? And that is not really defined. And of course, what we've seen increasingly in China is it suddenly stopped publishing data if it didn't look too favorable. Youth unemployment data stopped. So if you now get hold of figures on youth unemployment, was that something that was a state secret that you're now leaking? You know, where are the lines? Where are the barriers of what is acceptable and what is unacceptable?
These developments follow an order from Beijing to remove all foreign computer equipment and software in government offices by 2022, as well as a move to ban Tesla vehicles from some government compounds over worries about the car's cameras. Whether it's fashion, social media, business consultancies, devices, or electric vehicles, the powers that be in both capitals believe there are links to national security. Amidst all the tension, a word entered the global lexicon in year 2023: de-risking.
We're not looking to decouple from China. We're looking to de-risk and diversify our relationship with China. That means taking steps to diversify our supply chains, and we're not dependent on any one country for necessary product. It means resisting economic coercion together and countering harmful practices that hurt our workers. It means protecting a narrow set of advanced technologies critical for our national security. And those elements are all agreed on by the G7.
China does not buy that. To the Chinese, de-risking and decoupling are the same thing.
It's psychologically feels the same, you know. Either it's decouple or it's de-risk. It's actually have the same impact of intimidate and also stop people going forward. So if you single out China as a risk factor and want to de-risk of that, that is really a big setback for the globalization, as China has been the biggest contributor of global GDP growth. For the last decade, China contributed over 30% of global GDP growth. And China is the largest trading nation with 140 countries. And China is the second largest economy in the world. And so if you call for a de-risk from China, which means we're calling for de-risk for development, we're calling for de-risk for the progress, for the trade, for the investment, that's a very wrong message to send.
The Chinese don't want decoupling and they don't want de-risking. They want things to go back to the way they were before, where there was deep, thick interdependence economically between both countries and there were fewer barriers to trade between both countries. And to accept that de-risking is a relatively positive outcome in comparison to decoupling would be to concede that this is the way that things will be going forward. And I don't think the Chinese are yet at a point where they're willing to celebrate that de-risking is slightly better than decoupling.
Why do some Western nations feel compelled to de-risk? Let's wind the clock back to the beginning of the pandemic. 2020, as COVID-19 spread, Beijing slapped 20 billion Australian dollars worth of sanctions on Australian goods like wine and lobsters. This after Canberra called on the WHO to investigate the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic, a sign that Beijing will use its economic leverage to punish trading partners over political disputes. The Ukraine war changed the security calculus in the world. As China declared a no-limits friendship with Russia, anxieties about China's signals towards Taiwan also increased.
我们坚持争取和平统一的前景，但绝不承诺放弃使用武力。
The U.S. and some of its allies banned the sale of advanced semiconductors to China, citing concerns about their military use. China fired back, clamping down on exports of two crucial metals, gallium and germanium, needed to make semiconductors. And later, it curbed exports of graphite, used to manufacture EVs. Over in the U.S., in August 2023, Wall Street was issued a directive. U.S. investors are no longer allowed to invest in areas with sensitive technologies and products, like AI and microelectronics, in China. As de-risking intensified, global investors pull out over $210 billion from Chinese stock and bond markets. foreign investments in China become negative for the first time since 1998. With de-risking becoming a buzzword in boardrooms, China had a message in press rooms.
我们坚决反对人为将经贸问题政治化。中国将不断地扩大市场规模，创造合作机会，同时也为各国投资者提供互利共赢的合作机会。
In China, we've seen a focus on security on the one hand, and then on the other hand, we have these messages from Chinese leaders that it's business as usual. How do we make sense of the swinging of the pendulum between security and economic pragmatism?
This is a really important issue to get our minds around because all nations in the world, especially China and the United States, but all nations, are becoming much more concerned about their national security and figuring out how we square that with being able to engage with other nations in economic relations is extremely important. China has gone the route, as you say, of emphasizing both national security, but also saying we want to continue to engage in trade with the world. Building up national military capability is not unwarranted, and it is especially to be expected if you feel that other nations are looking to encircle and contain you. You need to be able to defend yourself. I think it's unfortunate that we're in this situation of a security dilemma where the weaponization on the part of one nation in attempting to protect itself makes other nations feel insecure, and they have to build up their security capabilities as well. It's a race to the bottom, a kind of a prisoner's dilemma dynamic. It's not helpful to the prosperity of the world, but that's the world we're in. The engagement with economic exchange, however, continues to be different. So China's view on national security is by continuing to trade with the rest of the world, because that's how it's become rich. Continuing to trade promotes its national security.
In November, President Xi visited the U.S.
中国愿意同美国做伙伴、做朋友。中国从不读美国书，从不干涉美国内政，也无意挑战和取代美国。
I think that President Xi and China's leaders would like to believe that a better environment, happier words between both leaders will compel companies to continue to invest in expanding their footprint in China. The reality, though, I think is much more complicated. I think that the trend lines are already pretty far along in terms of companies deciding that, that their interests are better served by having more diversification. And nice words and an improved atmosphere between the United States and China isn't going to alter that overall trajectory.
Is the money, 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 keep the world on track. Making money, money, money every day. If you're lucky, then the money make a real big stack. Then the money, 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 here to stay. Then the money, 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 here to stay.
Amidst all the de-risking trends, Mexico is having a manufacturing renaissance.
Our company has grown in the last 5 years 25%. We have doubled the growth in revenue in the same period of time, 5 years.
Then the money, 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 here to stay.
Creation Technologies is an original equipment manufacturer that has Fortune 500 companies as its customers. Many of those customers have shifted some parts of their manufacturing operations from China to Mexico. It's a trend that began during the Trump presidency when tariffs were slapped on Chinese exports to the U.S.
Some of the customers based in the U.S. have moved out of China due to the tariffs. In the next 6 months, we're going to be adding some lines and expanding our capacity. That's going to support our plans for 2024 and 2025 growth.
Mexico is part of the North American Free Trade Agreement, which means goods made in Mexico enter the U.S. tariff-free. Collectron, which helps foreign companies relocate to Mexico, explains why foreign investment is pouring into the country.
We have gone from a population or a headcount of 8,000 people to 10,000 people. And yes, we have brought 4 companies from Asia. Well, it started back in 2018 with a tariff jump between China and the United States. And it continued with the unfortunate situation that we have with the pandemic, with COVID-19. And of course, it has escalated to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
All of this has led companies to pursue a policy of friendshoring, meaning locating in friendly countries, or nearshoring, which means to produce closer to where one's consumers are.
Well, companies don't make a decision to transfer their operation overnight. You know, most companies take anywhere between 6 months to a year, up to 18 months to make a decision to establish an operation in Mexico.
It helps that costs in Mexico are competitive and the workforce is skilled.
We are fortunate to be in an area with a lot of universities around and highly talented and skilled workforce.
They have transferred some of their operations they have had in Asia back to the Mexican operations.
For years, America's top trading partner has been China. That changed in 2023. Mexico now takes the top spot. And it's not just American companies moving to Mexico. Chinese companies are also coming here, mainly to be closer to their U.S. customers. In Torreon, not far from the U.S. border, construction on a new factory, a Chinese investment, is nearly complete. When completed, this will be the manufacturing site of Milwaukee, a Chinese tool and appliance conglomerate.
Hicimos un viaje a China el año pasado. Sí encontré mucho interés en empresas chinas que han venido a Torreón, que han conocido lo que se está haciendo. Nos han incluso pedido que separemos algunas tierras para empresas chinas que saben ya las características y la conveniencia de hacerlo en una región como la nuestra.
In neighboring city Monterrey, there are more than 10 brands from China that have been set up and are manufacturing products from home appliances to auto parts. Chinese enterprises have poured $8.29 billion into Mexico-based projects since 2018, the year the trade war with the U.S. started. Some of these companies include auto parts maker Ningbo Shisheng Group and Tuopo Group, home appliance maker Hisense, Bethel Automotive, and furnishing company Kuka.
Chinese companies are setting up or forming joint ventures in other countries. Vietnam is one clear case, as well as Mexico. And then it's using those countries to become the exporter into the U.S.
Yeah, Mexico's exports to the U.S. are up by a lot since 2018 or 19. The increase in exports of many of these economies right now are driven actually by increased imports from China. So in effect, there seems to be triangular trade, which really doesn't look like a lot of de-risking, right? Like it's just the same trade happens more indirect and less transparent. And I don't think this is, sustainable. If an economy really wants to de-risk, they will try to shut down this channel too. That's the one thing. The other thing is that what we already see is that it drives up prices quite a bit.
These big investments made by Chinese companies have not gone unnoticed in the United States.
Today, I am here to announce that great power competition is back in the Americas. The hammer and the sickle has returned in full force, and the Chinese Communist Party's first order of business is to own Latin America, our backyard. China has secured a presence in Latin America through what we could call a Trojan horse strategy to become the #1 trading partner in our region. Let me repeat it. Our hemisphere has been invaded by China, and they are now the #1 trading partner in the region. #1 trading partner in the region. 20 years ago, they traded $12 billion. 20 years later, last year, they hit $450 billion. That is a 3,000% increase, 3,000% increase.
You can turn around the question and say, well, what is the United States doing in terms of its relations with countries in Latin America and Central America? And there, what you hear in Washington, or I'm not a Washington insider, but what I hear, emanating out of Washington is a concern primarily about immigration and drugs. That tends to be what consumes the oxygen coming out of Washington, rather than the question of we really need to reinforce our economic relations with the region. It's mentioned, but it doesn't get as much airplay as other areas. So within those circumstances, it's hardly surprising that countries in Latin America or Central America are going to turn to a country that's willing to invest and that is willing to trade.
Whether it's U.S. companies moving out of China or Chinese companies moving out of China, one thing is clear: manufacturing is on the march. HP has started to shift part of its production of laptops from its main production base in Chongqing, China, to Thailand and Mexico. Dell is doing the same. Apple shifted part of its production to India. And Japan's Mitsubishi Motors also ended production in China. With all the talk on de-risking, it's easy to forget that it was the Chinese government that encouraged its companies to set up factories overseas 10 years ago, in a grand scheme known as the Belt and Road Initiative. Just another morning at the Huaqian shoe factory in Ethiopia. This was set up 10 years ago under the Belt and Road banner. Today, it has an annual production capacity of 3 million pairs of shoes for export, making it one of the largest export enterprises in Ethiopia.
越来越多的中国企业，他就把在国内的压力、那种成本这种上升的压力，就逐渐来考虑到非洲这边，因为非洲它是一个人口庞大的一个群体，那么它就相当于中国70、80年代那种改革开放的那种模式，缺少的是资金，缺少的是技术，跟一些系统的理念。那现在在国内遇到了瓶颈的那些企业，他去找投资的时候，东南亚基本上也开始饱和，已经追逐的中国的步伐基本上饱和到了。唯有非洲这块地方很适合我们中方的投资到这来。
Under the Belt and Road Initiative, thousands of Chinese companies went overseas in search of lower land costs and wages. This was the first round of supply chain restructuring, long before de-risking was a buzzword.
即使没有中美或者其他的一些地缘政治冲突，那中国产业外迁也是必然会发生的。从07年开始，我们就注意到，当时已经发生了，比如说人民币汇率的持续升值，劳动力成本的持续上升，还有国内环保压力各种压力的逐渐上升。所以我们看到中国产业外迁有它一定的必然性。以前所有的经济发展水平比较高的国家都经历过这样的阶段。我们看到了地缘政治冲突、地缘政治压力、一些不确定性上升，对于产业链外迁也带来了新一轮的影响。
There have been several large-scale manufacturing offshoring in history. In the 1950s, the U.S. moved its manufacturing to Germany and Japan. In the 60s and 70s, more developed countries moved manufacturing to other still developing areas like Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong. In the 80s, the offshoring trend reached China.
You can take him apart, every gear and nut, but you can put him together and build him up. Wind him. Go on.
As long as machines are movable, offshoring will likely continue. Today, China is also moving towards a more service-oriented industry like all the G7 countries.
就是我们观察所有的发达经济体在过去200年的数据，工业制造业的占比都是先上升后下降，而服务业的占比是持续在上升的。那中国在发展过程中，我们已经到了一个刚才说的倒 U 型的接近顶部，或者从顶部往下走，就是制造业占比已经见顶了啊，甚至要开始下降。
Despite geopolitical tensions, some titans of American industry are doubling down on their investments in China. This is Tesla's gigafactory in Shanghai, which started operations in 2018. Now, a new mammoth factory is under construction next to the existing factory. This footage from September 2023 shows the scale of Tesla's new plant. And it won't just be manufacturing cars. In April 2023, Tesla inked a deal with Shanghai to manufacture its Megapacks. Megapack is a powerful battery that provides energy storage and support, helping to stabilize the grid and prevent outages.
这样的一个超级工厂的落地，它可以帮助临港、帮助上海快速的形成储能产业的一个集聚。所以我们有信心，在未来2到3年，我们跟特斯拉一起合作，可以在临港打造出一个新的1000亿级的产业集群。
Large projects like these would not have been possible without the support of the Chinese government. When China reopened after COVID in early 2023, Elon Musk met top officials and was quoted by Chinese press as saying he was fully confident in the Chinese market.
Elon had stated a goal of selling 20 million vehicles by 2030 for Tesla. A large part of that linchpin strategy is to sell into the China market because it's the largest market in the world. Again, more context. About 22 million cars were sold in China in 2022, about 11 in Europe, and 13.5 million in the United States. And so if Tesla was to get 20% market share in the China market, they'd be at over 4 million units. That gets them well on their way to that 20 million number.
Like Tesla, many other companies from the US and Europe depend crucially on China for a large portion of their sales.
外资企业在中国的业务，我们可以给它分成2块，一块是外销，一块是内销啊。那这2块业务呢，在过去3个时间节点发生了很重要的变化。第一个时间节点是2006年的时候，外资企业的通过中国的出口大概是内销的7倍，但是到了2012年左右，它开始持平了，开始变成1比1啊，都是接近在9000亿到1万亿美元这样一个区间波动，在那个前后。那到了2021年的时候，外资企业通过中国的出口仍然维持在1万亿美元左右，但是它的内销已经超过了2万亿美元。所以，如果你把外资企业当做一个整体的话，那么它有2/3业务是 in China for China， 在中国生产，在中国销售。
No surprise then that some big brand names oppose de-risking.
I firmly believe that the future of modernization should be inclusive and not exclusive, be based on cooperation and not decoupling.
A return to division and protectionism will only make recovery more difficult
while threatening our ability to solve real challenges like climate change.
German chemical company BASF is spending 10 billion euros on a new chemical production complex in China. And Volkswagen is also reinforcing its presence in the Chinese car market. In 2023, it announced plans to invest more than 1 billion euros on its new China Center.
A lot of manufacturing use China cheap labor to produce the product and sell to the world. But now as Chinese middle class is rising, we have per capita of GDP already reached $13,000 US, almost reached the developed country status. I think that the multinational realize now that China has a huge potential. For example, in a developed country like the US, 1,000 population may have 800 cars, per capita. But in China, probably is only 200. So there's a huge wave for China to grow.
Foreign companies are in a pickle. On the one hand, their governments have warned them about security risks. On the other hand, who wants to say no to revenue? A survey conducted by the American Chamber of Commerce in China shed some light. The survey found that 31% of respondents are increasing investments in China in 2023 compared to the year 2022. 22% of respondents are decreasing them. And 40% are redirecting or planning to redirect investments originally planned for China, mainly towards Southeast Asia.
Let's put a little bit of perspective on this. So if China only grows at 4.5% this year and does that for the next 4 years, in that time, it will have grown one India. And India, which is 1.5 billion people producing things, GDP, China can grow that in 4 years. Every year, it grows almost 2 Thailands. Every 3 years, it grows 2 Indonesias. So the scale at which China is growing, the scale at which it operates, presents lots of new market opportunities. Now, obviously, 4.5% is not as good as 8%, it's not good at 12%, all of that is right. And the exit and the signs of lack of confidence are things to be mindful of. But I think we need to not rush into a unanimous judgment that the Chinese economy has gone under.
In the race to become the world's largest car exporter, China is now #1. In 2023, its car exports overtook those from Japan or Germany. And most of the cars are these, electric vehicles, or EVs. China accounted for just 4.2% of global EV exports 6 years ago. By 2022, it became 35%. Japan, by contrast, was the largest exporter of EVs in 2018, with a 24.5% share. In 2022, its share plummeted to 9.3%.
My first job was at a factory in Michigan, Orion Assembly Plant, and we built 5 cars, 3 different trims, so effectively 18 different cars every day, about 500,000 cars a year. And so I was grounded in the quality, reliability, how things sounded, how things should fit together. When I first landed in Beijing in 2009, I got into a BYD and it was not great. It was pretty bad. The doors were paper thin. You could hear everything. The fit and finish of the interiors weren't great. I was in Shanghai in April and visited BYD. The difference between 2009 and today is night and day. You come to Shanghai Auto Show and you see all of the traffic at the Chinese automakers' booths. I was at the Audi booth, and one of my favorite beautiful cars, the e-tron, the RS e-tron. And it took me less than 10 seconds to wait for somebody, and then I got in it myself. And then you go over to Zeekr, and they have just launched a Zeekr X, which is a small little car that I think is going to be less than 300,000 RMB or less than $40,000 in the China market. I waited 10 minutes for this little car because there were so many people that wanted to see it. And so the management of these European automakers also saw this, and then in disbelief, they got into the vehicles themselves. They closed the door, they heard the sound, you know, that matches what they're traditionally able to do, and then looked at the technology on the instrument panel and the infotainment system, and jaws were dropped. I think there's a lot of disbelief, a lot of shock, but a bit of fear. You know, director level, manager level, now they touch, feel, see these cars, and they're like, wow, we are in trouble.
When it comes to clean tech cars, the world's biggest auto brands are now playing catch up.
China is the place to be. What superpower makes you a great developer? It's the ability to look around the corners. But this is not enough to be successful in China. You need to be where the big things happen. You need to team up with the fastest and smartest brains.
China is the world's most advanced country in terms of electrification.
Riding on the back of growing carbon consciousness, China's EV exports are set to double in 2023. Demand in Europe has skyrocketed in countries like Norway, where nearly 2/3 of all cars sold are EVs. With all that talk of de-risking, China's EV sales demonstrate that there are some products where made in China is still indispensable.
目前，比亚迪新能源车的足迹已经遍及全球6大洲50多个国家和地区，300多个城市。那商用车领域呢，比亚迪各类纯电动大巴在全球累计交付超过了6.8万辆。在欧洲呢，比亚迪纯电动大巴已经在欧洲的100多个城市运营。在亚太地区，我们在日本的纯电动大巴市场占有率已经高达70%，也是排名第1位的。
BYD's secret sauce has much to do with its batteries. Its blade battery technology is touted to be safer and more efficient.
这一款呢，就是我们比亚迪的汉，最近也远销南美，在当地非常的受欢迎。这款车呢，承载了我们比亚迪最新的技术，包括刀片电池，0到100公里只需要3.9秒。
It wasn't always rosy for EV makers in China.
NIO, XPeng, and Li Auto, these EV companies were set up around 2014 and 2015, and they were struggling, right? Wasn't it just in 2020 that NIO nearly went bankrupt? So how did these Chinese EV companies manage to turn around their fortunes so fast?
Pearl, you raised a great point. In 2009, the Chinese government decided that they were going to focus on the battery sector and the EV sector as sectors because the Chinese sector is manufacturing is a pillar of one of industry. So EV manufacturing, battery cell manufacturing, they looked at as going to be very important in the future. And they were absolutely right. So starting in 2009, they created subsidies for EV purchase. They also gave rebates for manufacturers that were building electric vehicles. And so through perseverance, through patience, through a lot of capital, rumor or forecasts say between $60 and $100 billion between 2009 and today being invested in those sectors has created what we see today. In 2023, the EV sector in China will get to about 8-9 million units, okay, from virtually zero in 2014, 2015 when NIO started. And so NIO's particular story is interesting because they really leaned into design, customer engagement, and premium in the early years. And that almost pushed them into bankruptcy if it wasn't for the Hefei government. And so the Hefei government wrote them a couple $2 billion check, and they've been able to kind of weather that storm. Now they have 6-7 products in the market.
It is no secret that government policy was crucial to the growth of Chinese EV companies.
国家政策的扶持，多年扶持的结果，应该是对私人购买的话，大概是从10年就开始。那么很长一段时间，其实销量并不是很大。但是随着这个市场就是一些条件的逐步成熟，一个新能源车的质量本身也上来了，另外一个电池的成本也下去了，还有一个就是我们这个充电的设施，对吧，越来越普及了。那么这个是多方面的这个因素促成的。
But the spectacular growth of these companies is prompting other governments to push back.
We have not forgotten how China's unfair trade practices affected our solar industry. Many young businesses were pushed out by heavily subsidized Chinese competitors. Pioneering companies had to file for bankruptcies. Promising talents went searching for fortune abroad. This is why fairness in the global economy is so important, because it affects lives and livelihoods. Entire industries and communities depend on it. So we have to be clear-eyed about the risks we face. Take the electric vehicle sector. It is a crucial industry for the clean economy with a huge potential in Europe. But global markets are now flooded with cheaper Chinese electric cars. And their price is kept artificially low by huge state subsidies. This is distorting our market. So I can announce today that the Commission is launching an anti-subsidy investigation into electric vehicles coming from China. Europe is open to competition, but not for a race to the bottom. De-risk, not decouple.
这里我想强调的是，欧盟拟采取的调查措施是以公平竞争为名，行保护自身产业之实，是赤裸裸的保护主义行为，将严重扰乱和扭曲包括欧盟在内的全球汽车产业链供应链，并将对中欧经贸关系产生负面影响。
On the same day, in what was widely seen as a retaliatory move, China announced it would slap anti-subsidy duties on the EU's potato starch imports for 5 years.
Bear in mind that the European has a huge number of cars selling in China. You know, all the largest European automakers, China is the largest auto market. So we don't want to see a trade war happening, and we don't want to see this really impact not only Chinese companies but also European companies.
If there is any real protectionism of the European market from China EV Inc., there could be repercussions in the Chinese market for the European brands.
Yeah, because if China really wanted to hit back, they could cause a lot of hurt to European car manufacturers, the likes of Porsche, Mercedes, and BMW.
Yeah.
China controls 70% of the processes of making solar, at least 50% of the processes of making wind turbines. They have the largest EV companies in the world, and they also control batteries. To meet climate change goals, do you think it's even possible for Western countries to de-risk from China green tech?
There's a race now to try and get to a point where our handle on the global climate change does not go past the irretrievable point. If we go past 2.5%, 3%, it might be that we will never be able to recover. So we need to think about that resilience. But the race is, can we do that if we're serious about de-risking and decoupling in a way that doesn't breach that? And I think my sense from looking at how the world has been able to manage this transition is it'll be very expensive, if not impossible. So this is an imperative for the world to actually make friends and be nice. If you want to save the planet, you cannot go on about somebody's values being different from yours. Save that for some other time. We need to work together on this.
The United States should do whatever it can to accelerate the transition to renewables and green energy. And the simple reality is that much of the leading technology in the world resides in China. And so if the United States wants to move forward as quickly as possible, then it will need to do so in partnership with China.